Welcome to the Inforonics Supportcast, bringing you insight and tips from the world of customer, technical, and infrastructure support. Inforonics Supportcast starts now.
Welcome back to Inforonics Supportcast Weekly. I'm Matt Hooper.
I'm Scott Taylor.
Well, Scott, last week when we talked about the risk to outsourcing, it really made me think about all the challenges we have when you enter a relationship with a third-party company. ITIL talks about this contract management aspect of your vendors and how you have to manage them through proper metrics and things like that. And if so, metrics are a vital component. It's a great next step to what we've been talking about. When we look at our metrics within our organization, we're an extremely metric-driven organization. I look at the metrics that we have. We have reports that come out several times a day that just talk simply about our shifts. We talked about them week one when we talked about the emails. We looked at reports for how many emails came in, how quickly they were responded to. There's also phone reports, how long someone waited on a call, things like that. We also have infrastructure measurements, what incidents were triggered by the event management system. All of this happens every day, very operationally. Then tactically, shift reports will talk to client service managers who might have to give a heads up to a client. We then have more strategic actions we take on this information. You might have to re-architect the solution or work with the team to figure out a new client requirement based on what we've been seeing and driven. Or sometimes strategically to an executive level, we may have to look at the client and say we have to have a sit down and chat, or we have to produce a new service so we can stay competitive. We might have to increase staffing headcount, make changes, reevaluate a whole lot of things based on these metrics. A lot of data floating around. Let's get into some real core of what we're talking about. When you go into metrics management, you have to collect the information, you have to process it, you have to report on it, you have to act on it. Again, email, phone, systems. How do we bring this all together? What's the driver for us, and how do we make heads and tail of all these different little bits of information that's floating around?
Well, I mean, you said in the very beginning, I mean, you have to be able to collect this data to ensure that you're doing the right thing, or you might need this data to ensure that you're staffed appropriately, or you need headcount or something like that. Ultimately, data is that piece of information that makes it so that an action can be taken on something. We need data to run our company. We need data to provide to our clients to make sure that we're doing the appropriate things, we're hitting our SLAs, and to make sure that we're doing a quality job. Ultimately, data, especially in terms of quality, is one of the key things that we're always trying to improve upon and grow with our clients. KPIs, key performance indicators, is one of the best ways that we can continue to show value to our clients and show them the job that we're doing and show them that we're doing quality work.
You mentioned an SLA, right? So for those who might not be that familiar with metrics, a service level agreement is basically when we establish with our clients to what level of service we are agreeing we will respond or provide. So give me an example.
Phone calls. Industry standard, 80% of the calls will be answered in 120 seconds or less. That is an industry standard for most technical support organizations in terms of answering the phone. And that's the SLA that we manage to also. There's a few things that you need to say about that. Statistically, with that type of SLA, you need to have enough calls coming in to make it statistically valid. If you have a client that receives 20 phone calls in a given month, it's hard to oftentimes meet that 80, 120 because all it takes is one or two calls to be too long or not answered appropriately.
Sure, so you have an outlier that could skew your data because there wasn't enough sampling points.
Absolutely. So, and it really is dependent upon who the client is and things like that. So we actually, in our contracts, we state what our SLAs are, 80, 120, generally for the phone. If a client wants 90% of the calls in 60 seconds or less, well, we can provide that, but it's going to cost you. Ultimately, this all comes down to algorithms, staffing algorithms to determine how many people need to be sitting in a seat to answer a phone call to be able to hit those SLAs. And by far, 8120 really seems to be the most beneficial to clients. And after all, our current average speed of answer right now does vary on a day-to-day basis, but is generally between 20 to 30 seconds. You are going to have calls that are going to take a little bit longer to answer, but on average, our average speed of answer is very, very low.
So at least it gives a client a way that they can measure what the value is to them.
Mm-hmm.
What is the increase in cost to have it answered 1 minute faster? Will that make their consumers that much more upset? Now, if it's a mission-critical application, because I know one of our clients makes a real high availability support infrastructure, they may want that 1 minute can mean a world of difference,
Absolutely.
right? So
Absolutely.
they're willing to pay the extra price, and that extra money allows us to then staff more aggressively to that, because it's a shared model.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about then the way that information flows into our systems. We have call data, we have email data, we have event management systems that are watching the networks, the applications, databases, things like that, all driving those events to our systems. What kind of filters then need to be in place? How do we determine what's a request? How do we determine what's an incident? If it's a priority 1 incident? Talk to us about those logistics.
Well, to that world, technology, that's where it really comes to play. It's identifying critical alerts and being able to appropriately identify in an automated way those critical events. I mean, when it comes to our own monitoring systems for our client infrastructure and our own infrastructure, being able to identify critical components is really pretty straightforward. And those sorts of alerts are going to come into our systems. They're going to go straight to our own technical support group, which in that world is really acting as a NOC. They're going to, follow remediation steps if applicable, or if necessary, they're going to be paging out to our own ops team and then owning that issue until it's actually resolved. And internally, we have our own SLAs that we need to keep in play there. If an issue comes through and it's a critical issue, a DNS issue or some server that's critical to our infrastructure has gone down, we have our own internal SLAs that we need to be able to meet for that group, which in many instances we look at them as being our customer.
Okay. So we have this, like any IT organization, our own service provisioning, multi-tiered. We will pass off a request to the network team, for instance, and they have to turn this around within a certain period of time, or else we're going to ultimately violate a request back to a client. So it's not only just having the metrics in place on requests, automated types of metrics such as our phone, email, and event management system. We then even need a layer of abstraction or monitoring around our monitoring, right? So we have some kind of watchdog service that looks at length of queues or looks at length of request time and starts to then alert or alarm on the metrics themselves.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. So if an issue comes through, it's been assigned to a group or it's been a critical issue and it hasn't been owned within a certain period of time, after that period of time, it's going to send up a watchdog alert, which is then going to just raise the priority of that. Internally, we use automatic paging process, and ultimately the last person who's going to get paged is the president of the company. You don't want that.
Right. You definitely don't want that. No, well, that makes sense, though, because if it's gotten to that level of criticality, then it could be jeopardizing a client relationship, which, hey, none of us want to come into the boardroom the next day and be blindsided. So we've got to manage through this information effectively. But so how do we know what data is really relevant and not relevant? You mentioned this term KPI, key performance indicators. What drives those? How do we get to those?
Well, honestly, KPIs and the measurement of KPIs is really difficult. As we were talking about, there's standard KPIs, phone metrics, email metrics. Due to the infrastructure that we have in place, those things are fairly easy for us to measure across all of our clients. But when it comes to other key performance indicators, first off, you need to talk to the client. What's important to them? Because not everything is equally important to all clients. Some clients want their issues resolved in 80% of the time on first contact. Some clients want to see only 5% of their issues ever escalated to Tier 3. Some of their clients want their issues resolved in under half an hour, so it's really difficult to determine what's important to a client. Once you determine what's important to that client, the question is, how do you measure it? If it's our own systems, if it's our own ticketing system and processes, well, we'll set up a process internally so that information gets databased and we can report on it adequately. But when it's the client's ticketing system, it gets difficult. We try to provide them help in what sort of data is important to them, what data needs to be captured, maybe perhaps a methodology that they can utilize to do it. But it's not necessarily our strong suit, I guess, so to speak, to be actually setting these things up for them. We have a lot of experience in Salesforce. I understand the Salesforce database and can help to tell them what tables that information may reside, but ultimately I'm not going to be sitting down and writing the code for them.
Right.
And that's a tough thing for many clients to do. They want to be able to measure these things, but that's a very large hurdle for them, especially with most organizations that are usually running 90 miles an hour.
So it sounds like you're saying all service desks aren't the same.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
And the level of reporting and management that they provide not only affects their internal processes, but any type of outsourcing relationship they may enter as well too. So, last week when we talked about risk outsourcing, I mean, there's another risk. Your own inadequate technologies, if you're not partnering up with a outsourcer who has some more advanced capabilities like we do to provide metrics. And we're always looking, right? We're always looking at other tools, and we're looking at third-party tools in the marketplace to see how we can advance and keep on the cutting edge. Because ultimately, if we're not able to measure at a very low level, we can't take those corrective actions at the low level. And that, to us, is where we drive our profitability. It's where we drive our customer satisfaction ratios, right, and things like that. So what else are we doing from a metric standpoint then to tie things back to key performance indicators? We establish what those are, we put those into our contract with our service level agreement, and then we some kind of rules engine or something?
Well, rules engines, again, it's
Wiki
it's
and
trying to, it really is dependent upon the system, and not all data is equal. Ultimately, and this is where I think a lot of clients struggle with it. They don't understand data. We have a lot of experience in data and taking that data, manipulating it, and being able to pull out the information that's really pertinent to us. But that's really where the client struggles. And I guess the end result is that we'll utilize a lot of different methodologies to be able to take that data and manipulate it and get the end result and give it to Jeff Roberts and have him create a pivot table out of it. The man loves pivot tables. I don't get it.
Right.
But
he needs to visually. Well, interpreting the information is vitally important. And Jeff's our Vice President of Client Services.
Yes.
So when there's customer sat issues, he wants to know way ahead of the curve where they are and start those discussions early on. And so visually interpreting this information is vital, right?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Hats off to him and people like him who can take data and be able to pull it into a system like Excel or something like that and be able to manipulate it to get the results that they're looking for.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I think that's some great information to share with our viewers and good lessons learned there. I'm sure there's many others. Next week we're going to talk about customer satisfaction, obviously driven from metrics like we talked about, quality surveys. We really want to get into how does Inforonics make sure that our customers are adhering to a certain level of satisfaction, because satisfaction is so perceptive, right? It's really, it's such a biased or variable thing. It's almost impossible to measure satisfaction, right?
It really is, and it's very hard to let a client know how well you're doing or not doing. And ultimately, the end users, they speak volumes. And so when they speak well about you, that's great. And if they're not speaking well about you, well, chances are there's something to be learned there.
Yeah, I look forward to next week.
Thanks.